can only be achieved if we have a strong network among ourselves, and there's a lot of learning and cross-learning and collaboration across different organizations. So that's why we have the alliance. You can see our vision and our principles. We're in the process of also developing a website. But if you want to get engaged, if you want to be up to date to what's happening with the National SBC Alliance, please follow our LinkedIn page. We have over 30 alliance members, and these are representatives from national, local NGOs. We have international NGOs. We have representatives from the private sector and development partners and donors as well. So we're very excited about this alliance, and we're very hopeful that we'll bring about meaningful change in Ethiopia with team members working together. Without much more, I think most of you know why we're here today. We have Dr. Amy Henderson Riley is here. She traveled all the way from the US and was here to do some work for Population Media Center at Population Media Center in Ethiopia, and she's been very generous to do a learning session with us. And the topic of our session is, as you can see, is the power of storytelling. Storytelling is not new. I think it is something we continue to do. We've been doing in the context of Ethiopia and different aspects of our life, say it be religion, culture, and we also do it for behavior change. So she's going to share with us some case studies from around the world. So take notes and feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. And she's very open to share with us what she knows within the limited time that we have. Without further ado, I'll let Amy introduce herself, and we can deep dive into the presentation. So if you can give us at least about 10 to 30 seconds to transition, I'll let Amy turn on her camera, introduce herself and her mic as well.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Maybe give a thumbs up or someone say yes. Okay, thank you. It is a wonderful pleasure and a delight to be here. Huge warm thank you to PSI for inviting me. Any opportunity to connect with social and behavior change folks, really just warms my heart and makes me so happy. So thank you for having me today. My plan is to speak for about 20 minutes and then open up the floor for Q&A and have this be an informal discussion where really it's not just me talking, but then we're learning from each other, sharing each other's experiences, which I hope will be a fruitful way to spend your afternoon. Anna, can you click to the next slide? So as you know, my full-time job, my daytime job, nighttime job is Director of Research, Evaluation, and Impact at Population Media Center. Of course, I work at PMC in the United States, which is where our headquarters are located, but we have offices around the world. Ethiopia is one of our offices that has operated the longest. Our organization has existed for 25, almost 26 years. And Ethiopia has been open since 2001, so from the beginning. So what a delight it is to be here with colleagues in this office who are so well versed in these topics. Prior to coming to PMC, my background for the last 15 years or so is as a social and behavior change researcher and educator. So I worked previously in academia, but I've also done a lot of work in international development, global work in social and behavior change, and also teaching SBC techniques, both to grad students, but also to practitioners. My specific expertise, and really what brought me to the field of social and behavior change communication, is my interest in narratives and storytelling. So At my heart, I'm a storyteller, and I know that many of you on the webinar are as well, so I'm happy to be in good company. I'm interested in how storytelling works to engender change. So not just, I'll get into this in just a few moments, but not just the excitement of storytelling, but how it works. But before I move forward, I know I have several colleagues from PMC who have joined, and I've just seen a message pop up. Fauna, can you mute yourself? I think maybe there is we're in the same room, we're apart, but I think maybe there's an echo. Maybe that will help. Thank you. But I know there are several colleagues from PMC who are here. So I'll just look at the participants here, and PMC colleagues, I'll just say your name. If you can just say your name, your role, and where you're joining from. So Ashnafi, can you introduce yourself? If you're able. Or on the chat is fine as well. Ashnafi is here in the PMC Ethiopia office. Asia, can you introduce yourself? Either unmuting or in the chat. Asia is a colleague at headquarters. Go ahead, Asia.
Hi, I'm Asia. I am a content strategist with PMC headquarters, and I am based in Washington, D.C. Can you all hear me?
She's
Thank you. Next, I see Garemu. Can you introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Garamo, the finance manager at Population Media Center, Ethiopia. Are you hearing me?
Thank you very much. Dr. Helen?
Yeah, my name is Hailen Yaushite. I'm the country director for PMC Ethiopia.
Kafielu? Yes, I know there is an echo. We're working on it. Let's use the chat. I do want you to hear from the other colleagues. So Kafielo, can you make sure to introduce yourself in the chat, as well as Melkamu, who's joining from PMC Ethiopia, Samuel, who's joining from PMC headquarters, Tigist from PMC Ethiopia. I think that gotten everyone. Tigist, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tigist. I'm from Population Media Center, a program manager.
Well, many thanks to all the PMC colleagues who were able to join. I'm really delighted to be among all these wonderful folks from both headquarters and here in Ethiopia. So from the rest of you, if you could use the chat box, please now, especially if you've just joined, please give your name, the organization that you're affiliated with, and where in the world you are joining from. So we'll be able to see that in the chat box. And I would like to encourage that throughout this presentation, that we use the chat to participate. So we have lots of colleagues here. That way we can talk about questions at the end, add your comments, any hesitations, anything that's coming up. Please use the chat box. That's the best way to participate. Next slide, please. So today's presentation, I wear a lot of hats. This presentation is on behalf of many colleagues I've worked with over the years. So while I have this job at Population Media Center, which I absolutely love, this presentation is not solely about PMC. This is about evidence across the field, which I hope will be useful to you. I've provided references where possible. I may have missed one. We're all human. Please use those references. I'm happy to share the slides after this presentation. But please reach out for any more information, for anything that I might share today that you have a question about. Finally, a final disclaimer is that this work stands on the shoulders of many people who came before me and supports many who will come after me. So this work, no single person can take credit for, certainly I cannot. This work is on behalf of many colleagues. As just one pictured here, This is a picture of me in 2018 with Miguel Sabito. You may know that name, certainly the PMC colleagues know that name. Miguel Sabito worked very hard throughout the 1960s and 70s, working on radio and mostly television in Mexico, and is considered really a founder and leading figure in entertainment education. Of course, entertainment education and storytelling look very different than the early days of Sabito, but I was very pleased to get to meet him, and he is still in Mexico to this day. Juana, can you slip to the next slide, please? Perfect. So, as I said, I've been an educator for many years, so I like to have objectives, what it is I'm talking about, and what it is that I hope that you take away. So, what I hope that you take away by the end of this presentation is 3 things. First, by the end of this presentation, I hope that you are able to define storytelling interventions for social and behavior change. In particular, I hope you leave with a new or perhaps renewed understanding of the strategy known as entertainment education. Secondly, I'd like you to be able to provide evidence for entertainment education across a range of outcomes. So this is where I will share some examples and case studies of different programs from different locations around the world that illustrate that evidence. And lastly, by the end of this presentation, it'd be great if you could name and share some key principles and best practices for successful storytelling interventions. So what are those things that you could take away? Perhaps you are working on a storytelling project, or perhaps you have in the past. What are those key takeaways? Great, next slide, please. All right, so on to our first objective, define storytelling interventions for social change and behavior change. So what we're talking about today, using storytelling, of course, has existed from the beginning of time. So people have been, using storytelling before there was written word. And so this is a strategy and a technique, imparting wisdom, telling stories, morality tales, etc., that has existed since humans existed. What we're talking about today is the specific subdiscipline of SBC using stories or narratives. Now, why do we use stories? Well, of course, we know many reasons. I've listed just some here, but this is a great way to reach audiences, right? You don't have to be able to read and write to understand a story. It's a creative way to reach people, to change both their hearts and their minds. It's a channel for talking about sensitive issues. So as opposed to, say, traditional health promotion, right? Which I'm sure many of you and many of us have done, like, things such as flip chart education or interpersonal communication. This is a way that's not one-on-one, where we can talk about sensitive issues that are taboo, that you wouldn't talk about one-on-one because it wouldn't be appropriate to do so. But your favorite characters can talk about stories, and you can reflect on those stories after the fact. In addition, storytelling interventions for social and behavior change can address a host or a range of public health and social challenges at the same time, which really make this a unique SBCC approach. And finally, of course, everyone loves a good story. Wherever you are in the world, I've never met anyone. I'm sure there are a few people in our global population, but I have yet to meet one. Someone who just says, I hate stories. They don't like stories at all. So it's a way that we can really reach a lot of people. I've included an image here. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. This is the idea of the story of the boy who cried wolf. This is a story that has been, translated across languages, across cultures. In fact, on the way to Ethiopia, I had a long layover in Germany, and there was a statue there of the boy who cried wolf. And I thought, how perfect. This is in my presentation that I'll be giving in Addis. So this is a story that wherever you're from, many people know this story. And so the idea of storytelling for social and behavior change is this idea that it transcends culture. So perhaps just to make sure we're all awake and have had our Ethiopian coffee for the afternoon, you can use the chat. What's a movie that you've seen recently in the past few years that's really stuck with you? that you find yourself thinking about over and over. You can share that in the chat as we move to the next slide. So there are a lot of different storytelling approaches. Unfortunately, I can't cover them all in 20 minutes. So today I will focus on the one that I have the most experience with, what's known as entertainment education. So I've included here a formal definition of entertainment education, which is a theory-based communication strategy to purposefully embed educational and social issues in the creation, production, processing, and dissemination process of an entertainment program in order to achieve desired individual, community, institutional, and societal changes. So this is the idea of placing educational issues within entertainment. Now, there's great debate. What is an educational issue? Who has the power to decide what those issues should be? These are all excellent points and one that we can debate and we can discuss at the end of the presentation. But this is the idea of this strategy, is using educational information within a host of media platforms. If you haven't seen this image at the bottom yet, it's a very interesting one, at least from where I sit. This is called the Impact Entertainment Continuum. Now, in the middle here, thank you for the zoom. In the middle here, the green is entertainment education, which is what we're discussing today, of course. As you move to, it's a Venn diagram, right, where things are overlapping. As you move to the left-hand side, here we have ourselves, many of us, social and behavior change, or what was formerly and sometimes still called communication for development, which is, of course, a subsection of the development sector. And as we move to the right, we have what's called social impact entertainment and mainstream entertainment. So these are overlapping concepts. You know, all of us in development love our acronyms and love to really define ourselves differently. But what I really love about this image is it shows that we're actually not all that different. So whether we are taking an existing program, such as, for those that may know, the US television show Grey's Anatomy, which is quite popular, and placing information into that show about HIV, for instance, which has been well researched in that television show, I would call that social impact entertainment because it is a mainstream show, but is using elements of entertainment education. Or the work that we do at PMC, which is in the entertainment education space, or a larger umbrella program of social and behavior change that may include entertainment education. So I think these are important distinctions and ones that I hope you will find useful as you find yourself in this space and the tools that you have in your SBC toolbox and how those may be different from other approaches. Next slide. So specifically, entertainment education, we'll just take a quick deep dive here. As this approach in this Venn diagram has many theoretical underpinnings. So the study of entertainment education has been conducted for at least the past 40 or 50 years. Folks trace this to a few programs, one called the Lawsons, one called the Archers, as well as the Sabito. I mentioned Miguel Sabito, the Sabito telenovelas or television programs in Mexico in the 60s and 70s. And underlying all of these early examples, as well as those that continue to today, are at least 50 theories. So on this slide is a book chapter from the Oxford Encyclopedia defining entertainment education that I worked on several years back. We looked at the literature across 10 years to see what theories are people using in entertainment education, what are the formats, and so these are some of those results. And so at least 50 theories underpin EE. From a theoretical perspective, do we really need that many theories? I'm not so sure. But the point or the takeaway here is this is a well-researched and well-supported area. So as you look at the topic of today's lecture, does storytelling work? I mean, the answer is a clear yes. And we know that from the theory and evidence base. As you know, entertainment education can be on the radio, can be television, games, street theater, social media, WhatsApp, can be a combination of the above. So really it depends on the context where you're working and the objectives that you seek to achieve. Entertainment education, as it was defined on the previous slide, has goals across the social ecological model, which I'll get into in the next slide, but I'm sure you are familiar with, and has covered a range of topics. Now, the roots of entertainment education were in the family planning space, and family planning, sexual reproductive health and rights continue to be a main topic covered by entertainment education, but there are many newer topics, many of which have been extremely successful, so including climate change, mental health, and others. Entertainment education often uses drama, but it can also use comedy, documentary, and nonfiction, which is quite interesting. So depends on your audience, on your primary audience, what their preferences are, and the storytelling that they like to watch or listen to. In terms of research, which is of course my interest, the majority of entertainment education evaluations use quantitative tools, mostly surveys, but there are also evaluations that use qualitative tools, participatory tools, and mixed methods. And I think a lot of those research approaches are changing and rapidly, which again, from where I sit, I think is a great thing as we continue to propel the field forward. And how do stories impact change? Well, this isn't a lecture or a conversation on theory. I'd be happy to have that. But really, at the heart of storytelling is that stories demonstrate new ways of thinking. As I mentioned, they bring up topics that are hard to talk about and can challenge the status quo in a way that really not few approaches can. And so storytelling is this unique, amazing, theoretical, and evidence-based approach for social behavior change. Next slide. So this is the social ecological model. I'm sure everyone on this call knows this model quite well, but in case you don't, no worries. The social ecological model shows the complex interplay of factors across a person and her environment that impact her behavior. So the evidence around entertainment education as a social and behavior change communication approach really looks at various levels. So at the individual level, let's just take a radio drama, for instance. Does it change her attitudes, her self-efficacy? The interpersonal level, which is key to this approach, does she have conversations with others about the topic? Does she listen to the radio program, talk to her friends about it, and then that impacts her life? At the organizational level, this can be schools, workplaces, etc. Community level, here we consider, of course, key influencers, faith and cultural champions, others who are absolutely impactful on a woman and her decision making at the community level, and how does a radio show for a radio intervention or whatever the medium may be influence that individual. And public policy, we have actually some really exciting and strong evidence for entertainment education changing policy. I'll give just one example. If you've ever heard of or seen the television show Soul City, which is a famous program out of South Africa, one of the topics that Soul City has challenged over many years is the topic of domestic violence, which, as it is around the world, a difficult topic to change. At the end of episodes, they provided information about the Domestic Violence Act, which soon after several storylines on domestic violence were aired many years ago. Actually, the Domestic Violence Act passed in South Africa, which was a huge revolution. Now, of course, the radio or the television program was not the only contribution, but this was very key to this public policy change across the country. So we often see evaluations of entertainment education really focused at that individual level, but I would encourage and urge folks to consider those wider outcomes as well, especially when we consider things like social norms. Okay, so let's just look at the difference of how it works, does it work to how does it work via 3 different case studies. So the first case study, this is some work that I did several years ago now, was a maternal and child health project in India. The title of this program is called Kyunki Jina Isi Ka Naam Hai, which means because that's what life is. This is a program that was funded by UNICEF, of course, key to UNICEF's mission. Maybe we have UNICEF colleagues. I see a few in the chat, and you probably know this program. key to their mission, right? Maternal and child health. So things like going for antenatal care visits, breastfeeding, HIV testing, etc. For this program, the program was created using the Facts for Life book. So embedded in the program, the educational part that was embedded was the Facts for Life information. Now, this was a very popular show that aired on the Doordarshan, the terrestrial main, one of the main channels in India. Of course, they're satellite channels, and it's a complex media environment. But this aired for over 500 episodes, which was amazing. And so it was a robust evaluation of 3 cross-sectional studies, thousands and thousands of participants, 27,000, if I believe, at baseline, midline, and inline. And what the evaluation showed using multivariate analysis was significant change across a range of maternal and child health topics across the social ecological model. So in simple terms, those who were exposed to the Kyunki program were more likely to go for ANC visits, were more likely to go for HIV testing, etc., compared to their non-watching counterparts. But it wasn't just a matter of if they watched or not. We used a gradient scale. So how many episodes have you watched? Can you tell me what happened to the character at the end of this season? So we used a complex scale in order to look at exposure. And what we also found was that the more exposed, the more they were likely to see things like social norms changing. So this was a very interesting and exciting piece from India. Happy to share this article with anyone. Feel free to, I've got PMC colleagues here. If you'd like to have this article, I'm happy to share it with you. Please feel free to contact us. So that's the first case study, television in India. Second case study. So as I mentioned, strong grounding in this area for maternal child health, sexual reproductive health. So when COVID happened, was very interested in showing, well, what's happening to the entertainment education programs? And so myself, alongside colleagues from 3 different organizations, I'm not sure if any of those colleagues are here, but from PCI Media, BBC Media Action, who's also, of course, here in Ethiopia, and Sesamo, or Sesame Street in Latin America, we together wrote an article to look at, well, how does EE work for a brand new topic? And this was a fascinating paper to write. And what we found was that those programs had existing partnerships. So just like all of you who work for organizations on the call, you have existing partnerships and infrastructure. So during this crisis situation, they were able to leverage those. There wasn't time for formative research, right? It was just get information out as quickly as possible. At the same time, entertainment education as a social and behavior change communication technique has built-in characters that people love, right? So Come Galletas, Cookie Monster in Spanish, is a well-loved character. And so they were able to use these existing characters who children and their parents alike know and trust. The content was quickly developed, but it had to be developed and tailored to the local context. So this is key to storytelling approaches, right? So I'm a researcher, I'm based in the US. I'm a storyteller, but I'm a US-based female white storyteller, right? So I don't know how to tell stories in Ethiopia. The context, all of that has to be locally made. And the call-in shows for several programs in this paper were able to answer questions from callers, address doubts, concerns, etc. So it became that two-way dialogue. So as opposed to just a radio program imparting information, callers then can participate. And that is also key to the success of these COVID programs. One thing that happened, of course, during COVID across entertainment was that challenges happened with production. So masking, how many people you could have in the studio, right, or in the television studios for Sesame Street in Mexico City. Mexico City had a very small number of crew, so that changes how you're going to do lighting, how you're going to do sound, all kinds of things. And still others rebroadcast content. So they were not able to produce new content, but were able to rebroadcast content. And so this is a really interesting paper for a new topic. And really one of the main takeaways here is that good storytelling is at the heart of this approach. If you don't have good storytelling, it doesn't matter what message you're trying to impart, nobody cares. Next slide, please. Finally, the third case study comes from a brand new book called Storytelling to Accelerate Climate Solutions. And I was very pleased to be able to write a chapter where we searched the literature over the past 20 years, looking at entertainment education for climate change. So we found 87 programs from around the world. As just one example, Punta Fuego, or Fire Point, which is a show about sustainable fishing and its impact on the environment that came from Belize. And this is an interesting case study because it looks at different approaches. So the way climate change and entertainment education in the global north uses media is very different than, say, in the global south. So in the global north, for example, in the United States, you're much more likely to find entertainment education that is in that social impact entertainment part of the Venn diagram, where you're using existing shows as opposed to a long running show, although we've also done that in the US. But one of the keys for climate change is that the messaging has to be positive. So if you're just watching a disaster movie, climate change has happened, the world is ending, you leave the movie and you don't feel very optimistic, and certainly not that you have any kind of agency to do anything about climate change. And so what we found across our review and what we think will impact the field is, for those creating stories about climate, make the messages positive, make it actionable. Have that person leave the theater or leave their laptop able to take some small action that they believe will impact the climate. And of course, key to climate solutions are children and youth. We found that several examples of children's programming that was very negative and could lead to really what they call climate anxiety. And let's not have our children be any more anxious. Let's have them be part of the solution moving forward. Next slide. So I'm going to encourage you now to use the chat box. From these case studies, what questions arise for you, comments? Please place these in the chat. I'm going to go through one final slide and then we'll shift to Q&A. But if you've got thoughts, please go ahead and place them in the chat so we can address them. Next slide. So some key principles. So I've mentioned some of these already, but just to reiterate, excellent storytelling starts with formative research. Before writers can take pen to paper, they must first understand the local context. So certainly for PMC, where I work, we always conduct formative research to understand the topics, understand the audience, and make sure that we're creating a program for that audience. And as I mentioned, the stories have to be created locally. Now, there are many shows that are enjoyed, universally. I know even here in Ethiopia, I was just discussing this yesterday, that I guess Turkish television programs are very popular here, very interesting. So here is a country producing content that is being consumed here as well as elsewhere. So stories may be universally enjoyed, but created locally. It's important to merge theory and practice. So we know so much about the social ecological model and blah, blah, blah theory. Consider principles of theory, but create and write good stories. Make that two-way dialogue, and you'll be much more successful. Now, when we look at entertainment education, social impact entertainment, long-running narratives are more supported in the literature as far as we get to the outer levels of the social ecological model. One episode here or there of a television program is not going to have lasting behavior or social change. It might change knowledge. You might watch an episode and learn something new. It's not going to have that sustained change, but that can happen and has happened in the literature with long-running narratives. Then finally, from where I sit, research, monitoring, and evaluation throughout a program's life cycle are critical. Don't wait till the end to be like, well, let's see what the evaluation says. Does it work? No, start with formative research. Conduct rigorous monitoring while a program is on the air or on television, whatever it might be, in order to make course corrections along the way, understanding it. At the end, of course, use mixed methods whenever possible. And I would argue strongly for the use of participatory approaches to really hear from our audiences, from their lived experiences, through their participation, from these stories that they've come to love, these characters that they cried for, that they loved in episodes or hated, and hear from them, because I think that participation is key, as it is across development work. That is all that I had for today's presentation. If you would like a link to that new text on storytelling and climate change, my email's here. You can also email any of my PMC colleagues who are here on today's call, and we will be happy to send you anything that you'd like. But with that, perhaps we should turn to Q&A. Excellent.
Hear me? But I'll start with maybe other people.
Can you hear Fauna?
Yes, yes. We can hear you, Fana.
Okay. Unmute? Okay.
Yes, yes, yes. Your voice is distant, but we can hear you.
Great.
Okay, if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask. I have 3 questions. Anybody on the chat to ask any questions, so we can start off with a question. And it doesn't necessarily also have to be a question, but a reflection or an experience that you've had working on edutainment and the context of Ethiopia as well. I've seen some of the case studies are not global. I think what I wanted to ask Amy is, the media landscape is changing. And a lot of people are really not watching, they're not watching the traditional TV. A lot of the content is influencer content, like short influencer videos. I personally don't know how to TV for myself. So how do you, what should partners, so what are you doing as population media in this space? How are you, leveraging social media influencers to bring about change?
So this is an excellent question, and I couldn't agree with you more. Radio alone will no longer cut it, right? So I'm sure you can go to far distant places in Ethiopia and people still, their phones are ringing in their pockets, yep. So in order to really meet people where they are, we have to have a comprehensive communication solution. So at the heart of that, I would argue is storytelling, right? So whether the storytelling comes through the radio, whether the radio then they're downloading via an app onto their phone, social media, etc. I compare this kind of like weight loss, right? So if you want to lose weight, you can change your diet. But if you change your diet and you exercise, you are more likely to lose weight than just one thing alone. So any of these approaches alone are going to have some effect, but as you can use them together, that also really falls at the heart of these storytelling approaches because it can incite dialogue, right? So using social media and at PMC, and perhaps Asia can provide some links to a wonderful program that we had at PMC called Islos High that was well published. There was a social media component to this where there were prompts to the audience. Audience members were able to engage. Of course, Islos High, which is a US program, is not the only program at PMC. Many have used social media. But that combination, so that then you have that dialogue, I think is really key.
Anybody else have any questions? Raise your hand or just walk on mute and ask. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Fana. Maybe it's you, not Keita. No, it's okay. One thing which struck me in your presentation is you said when we use a storytelling method, we should make the story see it from the positive side of the storytelling instead of the negative. Most of the time when you see the dramas that we are working on even being broadcasted, most of the time they focus more showing the negative behavior and what the impact it has, and then we are expecting people to change their behavior. So how do you, and then when you come up with when you do the evaluation of those story telling methodology, it is telling us that there are some kind of change. So what made you to come to that kind of conclusion that whenever we think of writing a story using a storytelling method, we have to make our story from the positive side? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question, and let me make sure that I clarify the answer. So, in entertainment education, we use different characters: positive characters, negative characters, and transitional characters. Now, those are important so that, for example, someone can learn about the importance of positively conducting a behavior, the negative ramifications, and then someone who's on the fence and whether they wind up, positive or negative. Now, that's also key to storytelling. The point that I want to make is that we found for climate change that the information needs to stay positive. For climate change, when you just tell people that the world is ending, everyone gives up. So I don't think that's true for all topics at all, but I think for climate change in particular, across locations, wherever you're working, Ethiopia, United States, doesn't matter, it needs to be positive. People need to feel that their actions, whether it's turning off the lights or changing their livelihoods, that it matters. So I'm sure there are plenty of programs. It's important to see the positive and the negative, particularly when we think of behaviors such as health behaviors, wash behaviors, what have you, but for climate change. Thank you so much.
Reflection or anything that they've seen that is working for them. Other programs.
Sure.
I think I saw you shared some in my slide about stories. So what are some of the things that you've seen across the board, like in the US and India and so forth, are good characteristics of an element of a story? How do you know when a story is good?
When a story is good is when your audience likes it.
Okay.
So, and I think that's what is key is taking the story to the audience. So before, right, pre-testing the characters, right? Also, the story might be great, but the music that you're using, they hate, right? Or the little tagline that they have. So certainly at Population Media Center, we always pre-test stories and pilot test episodes so we can get feedback. I'll give just one example from one country, which I won't name. There was the negative character who the audience was not supposed to like, but everyone was like, it was a radio program. His voice is very sexy sounding. And everyone likes the negative character. So we had to find a different actor for the negative character. He was too likable. But we wouldn't have known that unless you put the story in front of the audience. It's also key that members of the primary audience, right, your specific targeted audience listens to it. So I might listen and be like, this sounds great, even if it's an English language program in the United States. I don't represent all demographics in the United States. So making sure that who that program is designed for, if they like it. They like it and I hate it, doesn't matter. If it's for another audience, that's what matters the most.
So what are some of the most affordable, easy way to do testing, especially if you're doing something that's long? I think I saw for the MBS, how many? 500?
501 episodes.
Yeah. How do you test 501 episodes? How do you continuously?
Sure. So if you've got a budget for 500 episodes, you've got enough. You've got some money to do some testing. So set aside some money to do the pilot testing at the beginning. Make sure your characters are right. But then the idea of continuous monitoring. So not just monitoring, which we think of in kind of traditional, is the program airing, et cetera, but audience monitoring. Checking in with the audience at set intervals throughout a program, just like we do for other SPCC. What do you want to have happen in this episode? Having that one-on-one feedback from the audience. You can even use social media, right? So social media is not expensive. You can use social media. How are all the viewers feeling about how the story is going, right? So it doesn't have to be formal research in a focus group setting. It can be inexpensive ways to elicit feedback from the audience.
Exactly. I don't have any other questions. Maybe any reflection questions from any audience members. Otherwise, I think thank you, Dr. Amy, for your time and the BBC Media team. This is your last chance. Otherwise, we'll share the slides with you. Thank you for joining, and thank you again. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah.